we've been looking at, last time we looked at these waves of revolution that swept across Europe in the first half of the 19th century, following the Napoleonic Wars and the French Revolution. So you have the wave of 1820. Remember, that was a revolution that was fell even across the Atlantic and the Western Hemisphere in Latin America. And then you had the revolution of the 1830s. And today we're going to talk about the biggest wave of revolution that swept across Europe in 1848 and in the years that followed. And this was a very chaotic period in European history. A lot of events happened. And one of the results of the 1848 revolution was that it was so violent and so chaotic and so problematic that the middle class, which had been supportive of revolutions in the past and been one of the main engines and dynamic force behind revolutions throughout the first half of the 19th century, after 1848, they weren't so sure. Revolutions that caused killings and burnings and destruction of property, especially when you had the masses demanding jobs and food and cash, these actions kind of scared the middle class. They imagine if you're a middle class shop owner and all of a sudden you're told that everything you have to give to some landless person who just showed up and demands your property. That would be something you'd be like, I don't want to, I worked hard, I created this business for my family, why would I want to hand over everything I have to a bunch of peasants and a bunch of the revolting masses? And that scared a lot of middle class people. So the result was that after 1848, what we see is that many middle class people became against revolution. It wasn't like they sacrificed their principles, but among the middle class in Europe, there still was strong support for nationalism and liberalism, just like there had been before, except that now, after 1848, they wanted any kind of change to take place, to have it be done in a way that was orderly, that was done by the government. They wanted government action. And what we see in the years after 1848 is that the middle class and the aristocracy kind of came into a kind of understanding with one another. They decided that it was time, instead of being opposed to one another, to perhaps find areas of cooperation. And they both agreed that mass revolution and violence was not a good thing. So what we see happening after 1848 is that the principles of liberalism and nationalism still continue to inspire the middle class, but now, instead of there being grassroots uprisings and revolution, what we see instead is that the middle class supported the state, the government, taking action to support reform in a way that was orderly and lawful and did not result in destruction of property or hurt business. And so that was one of the major shifts that occurred in the history of Europe in the mid-19th century following these wave of revolutions of 1848. So what we're going to do today is first talk about 1848 and what happened in 1848, and then talk about how the principles of liberalism and nationalism were achieved in Europe, but not through the actions of revolutionaries, but through state action. So Germany would not be united by revolution. It would achieve unification by 1871 through war and diplomacy and government action. The same was true of Italy. Italy would not be united by revolution, but would be united by war and diplomacy. And there would be statesmen, conservative statesmen by that, who would unite Germany and Italy in the mid-19th century. Bismarck in Germany and Cavour in Italy. And there was a general trend across Europe in the 19th century that liberal and national ideas were achieved through the actions of the state, through government intervention. All right, so those are what we're going to be looking at today. And let's begin by talking about 1848. Now, in 1848, there was just a massive uprisings and property destroyed, cities ruined, wars, violence, civil disorder, And it inspired a scholar and historian by the name of Karl Marx. Karl Marx, when he looked around and saw the wars and the revolutions, he believed that this was that the world was approaching a new stage in history. He wrote a pamphlet that people began to see as the birth of modern socialism and communism. He wrote a pamphlet called The Communist Manifesto, and it was in many ways a reaction to all the widespread disorder and mass action and violence that he saw sweeping across Europe. And he believed that the operation of this wave of protest, this to him represented the beginning of the uprising of the proletariat. That was a term that he used to describe landless people, landless factory workers, the landless workers. And he believed that eventually this proletariat, the masses, would eventually succeed, overthrow the bourgeoisie, the middle class, and create a classless society. And this would be, the way he saw it, would be the end of history, that a world of beauty and love and joy and happiness and perfection would be reached once class divisions were eliminated and everybody was equal economically and politically, and everybody was proletariat. And that was his vision. And so the events of 1848 were events that inspired the birth of modern socialism, of communism. And one reason why the 1848 revolutions started this was because of this mass action. You know, the fact that thousands and thousands of people were on the streets and demanding justice and demanding this and demanding that. But you can see why, if you're a middle class, let's say you worked hard all your life to build a business or start a business and build up a factory, and all of a sudden you're being told by the masses that you have to give everything up to the people. That wouldn't be something that you would welcome very much, would it? It would probably be something you'd be a little scared of. And so the Communist Manifesto and these mass uprisings, you can see why this would be something that would make the middle class a little scared of mass revolution. And now, behind the 1848 revolution was, throughout Europe, an economic depression. See, what happened in 1848 was that across Europe, for various reasons, there was a really bad harvest. In other words, there was a tremendous food shortage. And this created all kinds of misery for people who were hungry and poor. And so that underlying all this massive uprising was the fact that you had a lot of misery caused by this economic downturn, this failure of the harvest. So that underlying all these uprisings, these revolutions, was a basic fact that the economy was hurting because of the food shortage. Now this revolution, think of when you throw a rock into a pond, you know, you have like waves. You all seen that before, right? Well, that's what happened here. This revolution started in Paris, it started in France, and it kind of spread from there across Europe in the spring and summer of 1848. So let's begin with what happened in France. Now, in France, remember, Louis Philippe had been made king of France ever since the Revolution of 1830. And under Louis Philippe in France, you still had a constitution that was very conservative. Only a very small percentage of the population, only wealthy property owners could vote. And there reached a point where there was a lot of criticism of the Constitution because of the fact that only the very wealthy could vote. And you had a lot of people, the emerging middle class, who couldn't even vote because they didn't meet the high property qualifications. And now in 1847 and into early 1848, people who were upset with the political system would have these meetings. And when Louis Philippe realized this, he banned these meetings. He decided, well, we have to put a stop to this. So he put them in a law was passed to forbid public meetings. So the critics of the monarch begin to have banquets. That's what they called them. Oh, we're not having a meeting, we're having a banquet. But the purpose of the banquet was to get together and criticize the king. Well, eventually, he decided there was enough anger with the king's system that in the spring of 1848 there started to be riots in the streets of Paris. Now, Louis-Philippe decided to send in the police and the army, and as a result there were multiple deaths. Now, Louis-Philippe had always prided himself as being a popular king, and he in fact was very much upset by the murder, the killings of his own people by the police. And so in 1848 he abdicated the throne. He abdicated in favor of a relative, thinking he didn't want to be king anymore. Well, the Chamber of Deputies, the French legislature, was having a meeting to decide what to do, whether to accept the abdication of Louis-Philippe and to accept his favored new nominee as king. So they're having this meeting, and what happened was that a group of French construction workers, led by a man by the name of Francois Raspail. Now, Francois Raspail had been a long-term advocate of France becoming a republic. And he had organized a union of construction workers in Paris. And this union, by the thousands, marched on the Chamber of Deputies while they were meeting, and they surrounded it and demanded that France be declared a republic. And the Chamber of Deputies was, of course, very scared and feared for their lives. So they, of course, declared France to be a republic and said that they were calling for an election by universal male suffrage, all adult males, to elect a national convention to write a new constitution for the Republic of France. So early in the spring of 1848, France is declared a republic, and elections are to be held to elect a national convention. Well, this is where things got dicey. Because of the bad economic times, you had a lot of agricultural laborers in the countryside who were hungry and starving, and they all converged on Paris. And the National Convention had formed a provisional government to run France till the new constitution could be drafted, and they were besieged by requests for food and for jobs and relief for all the thousands and thousands of people coming into Paris, demanding food and jobs and whatever they could get. And as the situation got more scary, with all these thousands of people demanding jobs and food, then riots broke out and violence. Now, eventually, the National Convention, the provisional government, had to call in the army to restore order because of all this violence and all this destruction of property that had taken place. Now, eventually, what happened is that as a result of these events, the middle class in France, they still believed in liberalism, but they wanted a strong government. They didn't want a government that was weak. They didn't want a government that couldn't handle maybe another surge of violence. So what happened is that they decided that when the Constitution was finally drafted in the summer of 1848, it created a very strong executive, where you'd have a president with a 4-year term who would be in charge of the military. Now, when they had in the fall of 1848, when they had the elections, one of the main candidates was Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. He was the nephew of the Napoleon. And Louis Napoleon had kind of, over time, become the hero of nationalists who remembered the glory of France during the time of Napoleon. So he was a very popular figure with the masses, and also he had the support of the French army. He also appealed to the Catholic Church in France that had a lot of influence especially among the rural population. So he was able to get elected by a landslide and became the first president of what is called the Second Republic. The First Republic being the one of the French Revolution. Now, the thing about Louis Napoleon was that he was despised by aristocrats and from the right, and he was despised by Republicans to the left. So he had a lot of enemies. Well, In 1851, they had new elections to the legislature, and a lot of his enemies got elected to office, and a lot of them included aristocrats. And there was a real fear. Louis Napoleon had a real fear that with all these new people being elected to the legislature, they might actually decide to ask the Bourbon dynasty to be restored to France. So to prevent that, what happens is he did the same thing that his uncle had done. He had a coup d'etat in 1851. With the support of the army, remember he had the strong support of the French army, he overthrew the government, and then he drafted a new constitution. And under this new constitution in 1852, he became Emperor of France, Emperor Napoleon III. Remember, Napoleon had a son who died young, so that would be Napoleon II. So this is Napoleon III, and he assumed the Emperor of France in 1852. Now, he set up a system where he was emperor, of course, but you still had a legislature that was elected, and you had universal male suffrage. Now, he gave the right to vote to all adult males, and the reason why he did that is because he realized that peasants and rural people were going to vote for him. And one reason they voted for him is because he made a strong alliance with the Roman Catholic Church. Under his regime, all education, all primary education, all secondary education was controlled by the Catholic Church. So he had the support of conservatives because of his support from the church, and that made him very popular among the more conservative rural population. And so by these measures, he could be assured that if he gave the vote to every adult male, regardless of whether they own property or not, then he could be assured that these people, especially in the rural areas, more conservative areas, they would vote for him because of his support for the Roman Catholic Church. He also made sure, of course, that the system still worked where he appointed the prefects, the governors. Therefore, he could control the police. Therefore, he could still, like his uncle, Napoleon, he could still use the police to basically intimidate and eliminate possible political opponents. So in a lot of ways, when they did have elections, the elections were rigged in such a way that candidates that were supportive of Napoleon got elected to the legislature. So it was very much like the system that his uncle had set up. It gave the appearance of being a liberal system with elections and representative government, but it was rigged in such a way to assure that Napoleon III and his supporters dominated the government. Now, under this system as well, the legislature couldn't even do anything. They couldn't originate any legislation. They couldn't do anything. All they could do was to vote yea or nay on proposals presented to it by Napoleon and his council of state, which he appointed. Now Napoleon III, though, his regime was fairly popular, though. He had and a lot of middle-class people were thinking, well, yes, he's a dictator, but at least we have order and peace and prosperity. We don't have to worry about the masses rising up and burning our shops and our businesses and our factories, because we have a man who has the support of the government and the support of the army and is going to keep the peace. And see, this pattern of radical revolution followed by a reactionary conservative regime, we see that occurring in country after country across Europe in 1848. So let's look what happened in Germany. Very similar thing happened in Germany. Now in Germany, you had Frederick William IV. He was the King of Prussia, and in 1848 there was uprisings across Germany and in Berlin itself, the capital of Prussia. And Frederick William IV, originally he was really scared because these uprisings were very violent. And so Frederick William IV, at first, he said, okay, let's have an election, and we're going to have a legislature and a constitution. So at first, out of desperation, Frederick William IV gave in to the demands of the revolutionaries and agreed to universal male suffrage and having elections and writing the Constitution. Well, what happened, though, was that when this happened, since the economy was bad, and there was a lot of poverty, and the harvest was bad, and people were hungry. In the spring and summer of 1848, you had, again, like you had in Paris, all these waves of poor people coming into Berlin. They wanted food, they wanted jobs, they wanted relief. They were all hungry. Pretty soon you had riots. And all of a sudden you had the middle-class people in Prussia thinking, well, yeah, we want a liberal constitution, but we don't want this. And so Frederick William IV quickly realized, hey, now's the time to act. He went to, remember, the Prussian army, its officer corps was dominated by Junkers, these aristocrats. So he went to the army and said, look, let's restore order. So when William IV raised an army and marched on Berlin and restored order, what he found was that many middle-class Prussians were like, yeah, thank God you're here. These people are crazy. They're destroying our property. They're eating our food. We need a strong government. And so when he intervened to restore order in Berlin and using the army, he had broad middle-class support. Now, what happened throughout 1848 and into 1849 was that the Prussian army intervened in many German states. And revolutionary governments that had been set up in other German states in the German Confederation, these states were overthrown and the old order was restored thanks to the intervention of the Prussian military. So William IV and the Prussian military was used to kind of crush these uprisings. And where they did this, where they intervened and crushed these uprisings, you found a lot of middle-class people very thankful that order had been restored. Now eventually, Frederick William IV knew that his success in restoring order had a lot to do with the fact that the middle class supported him, that the rising middle class in Germany had welcomed his intervention. So William IV quickly realized that he needed to make some concessions to the middle class that would, in return for their political support. So what we see happening is that one of the liberal ideas that Prussia came up with was in 1849 they abolished serfdom. They established equality before the law for all citizens of Prussia. So that was a big step forward. It was something that middle-class Germans supported, and this was something that was a concession to the middle class. And then in 1850, Frederick William agreed to grant a new constitution. And under this constitution, there was this new Prussian constitution, it established a representative government, but only the very wealthy could vote. So it established a situation where the king was willing to make some concessions to the middle class, and this involved allowing them to vote and to elect representatives to a parliament. It's called a Landtag. That's the German word for parliament. Landtag. You'll see it in a later slide. But anyway, so what we see in Prussia is very much what we saw also in France. That you have initial revolution followed by violence and chaos, and then the middle class wanting to see a more conservative government with the support of the army restore order and peace, and we see that happening with Frederick William and the Prussian army. Now, these events in Germany, now this happened in Prussia, but it was happening in other German states as well throughout the German Confederation. The failure of the revolution also was a failure to try to create a united Germany. You see, in 1848, when radical governments had taken over in Germany, a lot of the middle class at this time wanted to see a united Germany. Remember, in Germany, liberalism and nationalism went hand in hand. So what happened was that initially all the German states, under their new radical regimes, they all sent delegates to Frankfurt. Frankfurt's a city in Germany. And they all sent these delegates to Frankfurt. And at this meeting, they talked about developing a United States of Germany. Many of them really admired the United States. And they felt, there's the United States of America, why can't we have a very liberal United States of Germany? But but the problem was that the delegates really couldn't agree on what kind of government exactly to have. Like, some of them wanted to see Germany be a republic, so it would be a Republican United States of Germany, with a republic system of a republic. Another one said, no, we need to have a monarchy, a constitutional monarchy. But even there, they disagreed. Some people said, well, traditionally the Habsburgs have been the emperors of Germany going back for centuries, so we need to have a system where the Habsburg emperor is the emperor of Germany. But some people said, but the Habsburg emperor, he rules over all these non-Germans, like Hungarians, and we don't want these non-German peoples to be part of the empire because they're not German. And so other people were saying, well, how about we make the Prussian king the king of a united Germany and exclude Austria and all of its non-Germans? And so the big debate was to have a greater Germany that includes Eastern Europe and all these non-Germans, or have a lesser Germany. Well, eventually they did offer the throne. They offered the throne to the Habsburg Emperor Ferdinand I, and he rejected it. He said, I rule by the grace of God. I believe in divine election. Who are you to grant me the throne? You're just a bunch of masses. So he rejected the offer. And then they went to Frederick William of Prussia, and they said, will you be the new constitutional monarch of Germany? He's constitutional monarchy, I don't need that. I don't want your liberalism. I don't want to be your king. I'm king by the grace of God. So he rejected the offer. So by the end of 1849, it was clear that the Frankfurt Assembly had been a complete failure. They couldn't agree on what form of government they wanted. They couldn't even get a king to agree to be king. And so by 1849, the radical governments that had sent those delegates to 1849, all those governments had collapsed and been replaced by conservative governments, thanks to the intervention of the Prussian military. So eventually the Frankfurt Assembly just went home and was ended with no results. It was a complete failure. Now, many Germans took from that. This Frankfurt Assembly had a very important lesson on many Germans. To many Germans, the Frankfurt Assembly showed that if you have a bunch of liberals and intellectuals and academics getting together, they resolve nothing. I mean, you get a bunch of people talking in a room, they'll just yap, 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 and they'll resolve nothing. And many people in our government agree with that. Don't you think people say, oh, look at Congress, they can't get anything done. Obama needs to take executive action. We need strong leadership. We need a man to dictate to the people what needs to get done. That hasn't happened yet here, but in Germany, where they didn't have a strong tradition of liberal government, of representative government, a lot of people in Germany were thinking, yeah, democracy's a joke. It doesn't work. You just get a bunch of people arguing with each other, nothing gets solved, and what you need is a strong man, a man to take power and rule with an iron fist. And that's what they got. All right, so that's what happened in Germany. So remember the failure of this failure of the Frankfurt Assembly was remembered in Germany even into the 20th century. That's why people in Germany didn't really have a lot of affection for democracy, because they saw it as a waste of time, as a complete failure. All right. Now, there was even a revolution in Habsburg, Austria in 1848. And since Habsburgs ruled over a multi-ethnic empire, the revolution in Austria had ramifications for all the people subject to the Habsburg emperor. So there are a whole host of revolutions linked to the revolution in the Habsburg Empire. Now the emperor at the time was Ferdinand I, and he was the son of Francis II. He was not a very strong person, kind of a psychologically weak person, and he wasn't really able to handle what happened. In 1848 in Vienna, just like in Berlin, just like in Paris, there was uprising, violence in the streets. And initially, Ferdinand I was scared. And so now one of the things that all the rioters were demanding was they wanted Metternich's head. They wanted Metternich gone, because he represented conservatism. He had been running Austria as prime minister for decades. And one of the first things that happened in 1848 when the revolution broke out was that Metternich resigned. He went into exile, That was the end of Metternich. And then Ferdinand was very scared because of all the violence and the threat of violence, so he gave in and said, okay, you can have your liberal constitution, and you can have an election, and everybody can vote. So in the Habsburg Empire, they had an election, and they sent delegates to Vienna to craft a constitution. Question?
Everyone or all adult males?
All adult males.
Okay.
Yeah, all adult males. Now, the problem, though, when you had this convention, they met. Now, not everybody participated, because as we'll see, some parts of the Habsburg Empire decided to break free. But those who decided to remain loyal to the Habsburg Emperor, they all sent delegates to Vienna. Now, this convention couldn't resolve anything, because first of all, not all the delegates were German. There were some who were like, no, this is only for Germans, not you Czechs or Slovaks or whoever. This is for Germans only. And the other people were thinking, hey, we're people too, you know. We need to have a voice. So they couldn't even agree on who exactly could vote and who would be part of the government. You know, the Germans and the non-Germans were fighting among themselves. And then there was a whole question of who should be allowed to vote, who should be allowed to participate. You know, in Vienna, you had a lot of these wealthy German middle-class people who were very disgusted by all these poor people showing up and thinking that they had rights and that they could vote and that they should have food. I mean, who are these people? Food. And the same thing was happening in Vienna that had happened in Berlin, that had happened in Paris. You had all people from the countryside converging. Remember, the economy was in the pits. There was food shortages. So people were coming into Vienna by the thousands, demanding jobs, demanding food, demanding relief. And many people in the middle class were very scared. They were afraid that under these circumstances there would be riots and disorder and property destroyed. Well, eventually what happened was that Ferdinand decided it was time to act. Just like Frederick the William of Prussia had acted. He decided to call in the army. Now, the Habsburg Empire was very big, and there were these, the Croats. The Croats were Slavs who were in what is today Croatia, but it was part of the Habsburg Empire, and they had always, the Croatian militia, they had always been the recruited to fight for the Habsburg Emperor. And they had a tradition of being fanatically loyal to the Habsburg Emperor, and they would fight for the king and fight for the emperor, and they'd always been the ones recruited to fight against the Turks and all that, and they were very loyal, very conservative. So Ferdinand, what he did is he calls in the Croats, and the Croats are more than happy to kill Germans. So thousands of these Croat troops, loyal to the emperor, they march on Vienna. And they even carry their battle axes. I mean, these guys have guns and everything, but they like their good old battle axes. They like to pull out the battle axe and start slapping people around and just cut their heads off. So that the Croatian troops, with their battle axes, they come in and they just restore order. They crush the opposition. They kill anybody who opposes the emperor, and the emperor is restored to full power, thanks to the Croatian warriors, the Croatian militia, the Grundegar, whatever they were called. A very similar thing happened in 1989 when you had the big Beijing uprising. The Communist Party called in the rural peasant armies in the more rural areas who were very loyal to the army, and they were the ones who crushed the protesters in Beijing. Very similar situation. Just like the Russians used the Cossacks as their paramilitary to crush opposition in Crimea. It's a very, very similar idea. So anyway, the Croatians restored order, and the government, the convention that was supposed to write a new constitution, it was dismissed. It never accomplished anything. The emperor was restored to full power, and that was the end of the revolution. Now, Ferdinand was an emotional wreck after all this, and he ended up abdicating the throne in favor of his cousin, Francis Joseph, or Franz Joseph. And here's a picture of him on the lower left here. And he would assume the throne of the Habsburg Empire. He was very conservative, and he would actually rule Habsburg Empire until 1916 as the Habsburg Emperor of Austria. And so what happened in Vienna was that they didn't even make any concessions to the middle class. The Habsburgs didn't. They, thanks to the intervention of the army, the loyal army, when they were restored to full power, they were restored to full power with no even concessions to liberalism. Now, like I said earlier, the Habsburg Empire was huge, and subject peoples all revolted as well. And one group to revolt were the Hungarians. The Hungarians wanted to be independent. And in 1848, Hungary declared its independence from Austria. Now, the leader of the Hungarians, one of their leading statesmen, was a man by the name of Louis Kossuth. You can see his picture up here. He was inspired by Mazzini's ideas of liberalism and nationalism. And he had actually spent some time in the United States, and he wanted to create a Republic of Hungary, he wanted to have a constitution like the United States. He even had a plan to include other peoples who were part of the Habsburg Empire, like the Slovaks and the Romanians and the Ruthenians. Remember, the Habsburg Empire included all these different nationalities. And he had this idea. He said, look, let's take all these different nationalities and create a United States of the Danube. They're all, the Danube River flowed through over much of these lands. So he said, let's create, he called it the Danubian Federation. He had this vision of a republic of federated states, like the United States of America. Now you have a United States of the Danube. So he instead of it being a Habsburg Empire, he envisioned a republic, a federation of republics in Central Europe. It was a very visionary idea. And he had a lot of support among the Hungarians. Now, among the Hungarians, you had a lot of, in Hungary, you had a lot of small landowners who all considered themselves to be nobles, but they weren't. A lot of them were just basically poor farmers. But the Hungarian farmers supported Kossuth, and he believed in his ideas of creating this republic. But what happened was that the Habsburgs were not going to let go of Hungary. The Habsburgs believed that they were the kings of Hungary, and they weren't going to allow this to happen. So what happened is that the Habsburgs appealed to an old ally of theirs, Russia. Remember, going back to the days of Peter the Great, the Habsburgs and the Romanovs had always been strong allies and supporters of one another. They both had very aristocratic, very conservative regimes, and so they had good reasons to be supportive of each other. Plus, another thing they had in common is that they both controlled the Poles. Remember, they had worked together to annex Poland. Some of Poland had gone to Austria, and other parts of Poland had gone to Russia. So Russia and Austria both had a lot of common interests. So what happened is that Austria appealed to Russia, and the very conservative Tsar of Russia, Nicholas, he decided to intervene on behalf of the Habsburgs. So in 1849, 400,000 Russian troops invaded Hungary to aid the Habsburgs. And with Russian help, the Hungarian Revolution was crushed, just brutally crushed. And that was the end of Hungarian independence. So with Russian alliance, that was the end of that, and the Hungarian bid for independence came to an end with no concessions whatsoever. Now, with the help of the Russians, though, the Habsburgs could focus their efforts on keeping control of their empire in Italy. Remember, ever since the Congress of Vienna, most of northern Italy was controlled by the Habsburgs of Austria. And now there was in Italy, in 1848, just like there in Germany, just like in France, in Italy there were massive uprisings in 1848. And they actually, the Italian revolutionaries who succeeded in overthrowing these conservative governments, they actually sent delegates to Florence to get together and maybe write a new constitution for a united Italy. So just like the Germans had tried at Frankfurt to create a United States of Germany, now Italian revolutionaries got together and decided, hey, let's create a United States of Italy. But just like in Germany, when all these Italian revolutionaries got together to have this convention to talk about a united Italy, they couldn't agree on anything. Because Italy was a very diverse country. Northern Italy is a lot like Germany. It's, a lot of Northern European blood. There's a lot of blondes in Northern Italy. Southern Italy is more like Greece and Mediterranean, and they speak a person from Sicily could barely understand somebody from Milan. So the Italians, when they had this convention to get together and talk about united Italy, they were so different from one another and had different ideas. Should they be a monarchy? Should they be a republic? They couldn't agree on anything. So the convention was a complete failure. Now, it so happened that Charles Albert, who was the king of Sardinia, he was open to liberalism, and he had this idea of he becoming the king of just northern Italy as a constitutional monarchy. So he was open to the idea of a constitutional monarchy, with he himself being the king of at least a northern Italy. And so many Italians figured they could rally behind his standard, and maybe they could unite northern Italy and liberate themselves from Habsburg rule. But the fact of the matter is that now that the Russians were helping the Habsburgs crush Hungary, now the Habsburgs of Austria could send their full troops to crush the Italian uprising. And they did. So eventually, by 1849, Charles Albert of Sardinia was defeated. He ended up abdicating the throne, and by the end of 1849, Habsburg rule had been established throughout northern Italy. So the revolution was ended in failure. Now, Italians remembered the same thing. A lot of Italians remembered these events and said, look, you get a bunch of liberals together and they get them in a meeting, they can't agree on anything. Obviously, liberalism is a failure. Now, also another thing that happened during this time was that when there was an uprising in Rome and in the Papal States against the Pope, and nationalists tried to seize control in Rome, you actually had the French intervene. Remember, Louis Napoleon of France was trying to win the support of the Catholic Church, and many Catholics in France didn't think that it was right that the Pope should be mistreated, should be driven from power in Italy. They didn't want the Pope to be subject to a foreign government, like an Italian national government. So what happened was that the French actually intervened in the case of Rome, and the French troops were the ones who restored the Pope to political power in central Italy and in the Papal States. So by the end of 1849, through the intervention of Habsburg troops, Austrian troops, as well as French troops, the revolution in Italy had been completely squashed, and the old governments had been restored to full power, and that was the end of that. So what we see happening across Europe in 1848 is that you can see that many middle-class people came to believe that revolution was a bad thing, and that the best way to maintain or establish liberal governments based on liberal principles would be through some kind of orderly government process, as opposed to grassroots radical revolution. All right, so that would be that lesson would be played out in the middle of the 19th century. So when Italy and Germany would be united, it would not be by radical revolution, it would be united by military action and through diplomacy. So that's what we're going to look at next. So why don't we take a little break for a while, a couple minutes, and then we'll talk about Europe post-1848 after that. All right, so when Germany was united, remember one of the lessons of 1848 for Germans was that you get a bunch of liberals get together, having a meeting, they don't resolve anything. And so when Germany was united, it was united by, believe it or not, an aristocrat, a Junker, who united Germany not through revolution, but through war and diplomacy, through what was called blood and iron, through war, blood, and iron, iron weapons. That's how Otto von Bismarck was responsible for uniting all of Germany, and he sometimes is referred to the architect of uniting Germany, creating the Second Reich, the Second Empire. All right, so replacing the Holy Roman Empire as the First Reich, and the empire that was united thanks to Bismarck is the Second Reich, and that's why Hitler's regime is called the Third Reich, which is just a German word for empire. Anyway, all right, so now it would be Otto von Bismarck who would unite Germany. Now, just a little background on Bismarck. He came from a family of German aristocrats. The Germans in Prussia, the Junkers, had historically been the service nobility of the Prussian monarchs. And Otto von Bismarck came from that tradition. And so he was very conservative, and he believed in the divine right of kings. But the thing about Bismarck was that he was also a pragmatist. He realized that if he was going to maintain the dignity of the Prussian king and preserve the privileges of the aristocracy, that given the new order, he had to make deals with the middle class. So he was very much a pragmatist in the sense that he was willing to work with the middle class to achieve his objectives, which would be loyalty to the Prussian king and preserving aristocratic privileges as best he could for his own class, for his aristocratic class. And that was what Bismarck set to do. So he was determined if liberals wanted to unite Germany under a single government, he was going to make darn sure that it was united by a Prussian king, his king. And during the whole time, he only served the king. He was very good friends, had a very personal relationship with William of Prussia, William I of Prussia. They worked together, and Bismarck was basically his right-hand man. William I didn't really take a very active role in the government. He relied on Bismarck, his right-hand man, his main minister, to conduct the government. Now Bismarck realized that according to the new constitution that had been drafted in 1850, he had to work with the middle class because you had in Prussia, you had a parliament called the Landtag, and it was dominated by a party that were called the National Liberals. Now, the National Liberals were middle-class German. A lot of them were industrialists. You've got to remember that a big chunk of Germany, of Prussia, included parts of western Germany along the Rhine River that were becoming rapidly industrialized with coal mines and factories. And so you had this rising middle class that was making lots of money and becoming more wealthy, more influential. And this middle class, they voted, and they had a lot of seats in the Landtag, in the Prussian parliament. So Bismarck realized early on that if he was going to have power and secure his own goals, he had to work with liberals. He had to work with the middle class to achieve his own goals. Now, one thing he decided to do, this was a great move, he decided that if Germany was to be united, it was going to be united through the Prussian king. He wanted the Prussian king to be a king of united Germany. Now, one way he could secure the support of Germans and exclude the Habsburgs of Austria was by promoting free trade. Why? Well, you see, Austria was very rural, and the powerful aristocrats in Austria, they liked to put a lot of taxes on especially agricultural imports, tariffs, to help themselves out so that they didn't have to compete with foreign agricultural goods. So wealthy aristocrats in Austria, they wanted high tariffs as a way to kind of make sure that they had a guaranteed market for their agricultural goods. Now, German middle class factory workers, and not factory workers, but factory owners and businessmen, they hated tariffs because they saw it as a restraint on free trade. They wanted free trade, no taxes on trade, because that would benefit economic growth from their point of view. So what Bismarck proposed in 1864 was that the German states organize a Zollverein, a free trade zone. Right now we have the North American Free Trade Zone, where there's no tariffs between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. Well, this was an earlier version of that. So that all the German states who wanted to join would be united, that there would be no trade tariffs between German states. Now, the Habsburgs of Austria didn't want any part of this because their aristocrats liked trade tariffs. They liked tariffs. So by supporting the Zollverein, Bismarck accomplished two goals. He excluded the Habsburgs of Austria so they weren't part of the equation. Because remember, he wanted his king to be a king of the United Germany. Another thing about the Zollverein was that since Bismarck advocated for it, he became a hero to the middle class. So here is this aristocratic junker becoming a hero to middle class Germans because he supports free trade. So the Zollverein in 1864 was a step in the direction of a united Germany, because it united the German states, excluding Austria, but it united the rest of Germany into a free trade zone. Now Bismarck was someone who took advantage of any opportunity he could to advance his own goals. And it so happened that he had a chance to in what was going on in neighboring Denmark. In 1863, Denmark, there was liberal reform in Denmark, and Denmark issued a new constitution under the reign of King Christian IX of Denmark. So Denmark now had a new constitution, a new liberal constitution. Now what they decided to do when they passed this constitution was they decided to formally annex the provinces of Schleswig-Holstein. All right, so let's see if I can get this map to work. Now, if you look at a map of Germany, up here, this is Denmark. And this is Schleswig-Holstein. Now, traditionally, the king of Denmark had always been the Duke of Schleswig-Holstein. So he was the king of Denmark, yet as a separate situation. He was the Duke of Schleswig-Holstein. What the 1863 Constitution for Denmark did was to formally annex this area, and this area now became Denmark. See how that works? Now, this was this was something that was objectionable to Germans, because Germans were Germans, and they didn't like the idea of a bunch of Danes saying that now an area that was German is now part of Denmark. So German nationalists were outraged by what Denmark had done. And it was something that united Germans regardless of their political affiliations. Aristocratic Germans didn't like the idea that this area had been annexed to a very liberal constitutional monarchy. German nationalists who were liberals didn't like it because this area had been annexed by Danes who weren't Germans. So the annexation of Schleswig-Holstein was something that united the German Confederation, at least momentarily, because they both were unhappy with what had happened. Now what happened was that in 1864, the German Confederation, both the Habsburg of Austria and the Prussians, the Prussian government, they decided to take action to stop Denmark, and it's called the Schleswig-Holstein War. In 1864, the German Confederation, the Habsburgs of Austria, and the Prussian military working together defeated Denmark. They defeated Denmark, and that was the end of that. But that left the question, what do you do with Schleswig-Holstein? Now, this is where it gets interesting. The Habsburgs of Austria, they said, look, let's just appoint a new Duke of Schleswig-Holstein. And they had a candidate, the Duke of Augustenburg. The Habsburgs said, let's make the Duke of Augustenburg the new Duke of Schleswig-Holstein. Now, the Habsburgs were proposing this because the Duke of Augustenburg was very conservative. And they figured he would be an ally who would support them. But this is where Bismarck saw an opportunity. Bismarck said, look, I have a better idea. Let's unite all of Germany. Let's make Schleswig-Holstein a part of a united Germany and write up a new constitution and have a liberal constitution and a constitutional monarchy with the King of Prussia as the ruler of a united Germany. What a bold idea. And the Habsburgs are like, I don't think so. Because remember, the Habsburgs, they considered themselves to be the traditional rulers of Germany. And they weren't going to put up with that situation. So in 1866, Prussia and Austria went to war against each other. And it's called the 6-Week War. You know why it's called the 6-Week War? Anybody have a guess? It lasted 6 weeks. Sometimes it's called the
Prussia and Austria?
oh yeah, sometimes it's called the Austro-Prussian War, but the 6-Week War sounds better. Now this war was very quick. What happened is the Prussian army marched into what is today the Czech Republic, which was part of the Habsburg Empire. The Habsburgs sent an army to meet them, and at the Battle of Sadowa, the Habsburg army was crushed, and a Prussian army was poised to march on Vienna itself. So very quickly, the Habsburgs came to terms, and they agreed to give up any claim to Schleswig-Holstein. And so that was the end of that. So what happened, though, was that Bismarck, he worked out a deal. He was able to get northern German states to agree to his proposal to form a united government. So in northern Germany, Saxony, Hanover, and Prussia, those are the main states, they came together and they called themselves the North German Confederation. Now, one reason why they couldn't get the South Germans on board is because of the old ancient rivalry between Catholics and Protestants. Northern Germany was predominantly Protestant, southern Germany was predominantly Catholic. And some of the Catholic states did not want to be ruled by a Prussian, Protestant, Calvinist king. So the southern Germans didn't join the Confederation. But the northern Germans formed a North German Confederation, and the way they set it up was interesting. Basically, Bismarck wrote the Constitution with some advice from counselors. But it set up a system where you had a bicameral legislature. It was very similar to the United States Constitution in this respect. You had two houses. The Bundesrat, or Senate, was where every German state within the Confederation sent a equal number of representatives. And the local legislature was the one that elected the representatives to the Bundesrat, or Senate. That was the upper house. The lower house, so under this system, the Prussian Landtag would be responsible for selecting the delegates to the Bundesrat. In some parts of Germany, like in Pomerania, you still had the old estate system of church, aristocracy, and middle class, and they would be responsible for selecting the delegates to the Bundesrat. Now, the lower house of the legislature was to be called the Reichstag, and it would be similar to our House of Representatives. It would be based on population, it would not be equal representation. Bigger states would send more representatives. Now, under the Constitution that Bismarck proposed, it guaranteed the right to vote to all adult males. Now you think, okay, Bismarck's a conservative. Why would he want to give the right to all adult males? Well, he was a student of events of his time, and remember what had happened in France. Remember, the peasants are very conservative people, and they're more likely to vote their betters, quote unquote, than people who live in cities. People in cities are a lot more liberal than people in the countryside. So Bismarck, by giving their right to vote to all adult males, basically guaranteed that a lot of Germans in rural areas, they're going to vote aristocrats into office. So he counted on that. So under this Constitution that was created in 1867, that was created by Bismarck, it gave the right to vote to all adult males, and they were the ones who elected delegates to the House of Representatives, to the Reichstag. Now this is another key thing they did. Under this North German Confederation, instead of having the Prime Minister having to have the votes of the legislature, a system was set up under this Constitution where the Prime Minister answered to no one but the Emperor himself. Now, under this North German Confederation, the lifetime president of the North German Confederation was the German Emperor, William I. And under this Constitution, when William formed a government, he didn't have to get the approval of the legislature. All the legislature could do was it could make laws and it could raise taxes. But when it came to appointments to the military and to the government, it was the emperor who had full power and full authority to make those appointments. So the emperor could make appointments to government offices, to the bureaucracy, without any kind of support or approval of the legislature. Now, Bismarck put that in the Constitution on purpose because he wanted the emperor to be able to appoint, guess who, Junkers and German aristocrats to positions, high positions in the military. Now Germany had a civil service. In fact, the American civil service is patterned after the German civil service. So lower positions in the bureaucracy were filled based on, anybody could fill them based on your educational levels. You had to take a test, and based on how well you did in the test, you'd get a position in the bureaucracy. But military positions, the military was all made by appointments by the emperor. So under this Constitution, the military, dominated by Prussian Junkers, by Prussian military men, the Prussian aristocrats, they still continued to dominate. So this Constitution gave the appearance of being a liberal Constitution, and that got the middle class all fired up. Yeah, we have a liberal Constitution. But it was set up in such a way that the military continued to be dominated by Prussian aristocrats, by Prussian Junkers. And the leader of Germany was the Prussian emperor, the House of Hohenzollern. So basically, this Constitution guaranteed the goals that Bismarck had set out for himself. Germany was united by a Prussian king, and the privileges of the Prussian aristocracy were preserved by their monopoly on power in the German military. Now, under this 1867 Constitution, only northern Germany had been united. Southern Germany wasn't part of the equation yet. Now, these events in Germany had an impact on events in Austria, in the Habsburg Empire. One thing that happened is that the defeat in the 6-week war was a big blow to the Habsburg authority. Remember, ever since 1840, they've been ruling by an iron fist, with the support of the military. So when their military gets faced, gets embarrassed by losing to Prussia, that was a big blow to Austria. So the Austrians were very afraid that given the situation, there might be another revolution. So to forego a revolution, the Habsburg Emperor, Francis Joseph, he said, I will grant the Hungarians and the Austrians a constitution. He granted them a constitution. And so it's called the Ausgleich. Why is it called the Ausgleich? That's the German word for the equal monarchy. It was a dual monarchy. And under this new constitution that was granted by the Habsburg Emperor, the Habsburg Emperor was now Emperor of Germany, and he was also the King of Hungary. And under this new constitution, Germans and Hungarians could elect representatives to their own respective legislatures. But it was a very conservative document. It wasn't radical revolutionary document. It was a constitution that gave the right to vote only to wealthy Germans and wealthy Hungarians. And they could elect a legislature. But under this new system of government, he must have been taking lessons from Bismarck or following Bismarck's advice. The emperor retained the authority, sole authority, to appoint positions to the military and to appoint his own ministers. So you had a single government, but you had a separate legislature for Hungarians and a separate legislature for Germans. Now, what this did not take into effect were, how about all the Czechs, the Slovaks, the Ruthenians, the Romanians, all the other ethnic groups of the Habsburg Empire? They weren't part of the equation. They weren't given a right to vote. So it only gave the right to vote to Hungarians and to Germans. And the reason why they did it is because they knew that if all the people who were going to cause the most trouble were the Hungarians. So they were the ones who were given, concessions were made to. So again, in 1867, we see that you have, in a sense, a little bit of a triumph for liberalism. You have a written constitution, but it's granted by the emperor, and it denies the right to vote and representation for all these other ethnic groups within the Habsburg Empire. Now, it turned out that basically that Bismarck had united southern Germany, northern Germany, but southern Germany still remained not part of the equation. And what happened, though, that another opportunity arose for Bismarck to achieve full German unity, and it was a war against France. Now, this war against France had an interesting origin. It had to do with a revolution in Spain, believe it or not. In 1868, the very conservative queen of Spain named Isabel II. She was overthrown in a liberal revolution. You know, it was more like a coup d'etat. And they had elections, and the Spanish legislature was looking for a new constitutional monarch. And so in 1868, the Spanish Cortes, the Spanish Parliament, offered the throne to Prince Leopold of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but the key word is Hohenzollern. It turns out that Prince Leopold was actually a relative of William I, the King of Prussia. Now, it turns out that Prince Leopold really didn't want to be King of Spain because he thought that he was very conservative and he thought the Constitution was unacceptable. And he ended up rejecting the offer, and Spain went with Amadeo of Savoy instead. But what happened, though, was that when this offer was made, Napoleon III of France, he made a big to-do about it. He said, "This is unacceptable. We will not allow France to be surrounded by its enemies. We will not allow a king of Prussia to rule in northern Germany and then another member of the same dynasty, the Hohenzollern family, ruling in Spain. That is unacceptable to France." And he made a big protest about it, and he demanded that William I tell his relative not to accept the throne of Spain. Now, for William I, this was ridiculous. How dare Napoleon III tell him what to do? Who was Napoleon III? I mean, he wasn't of royal blood. He was just some petty dictator. So William I was like, "I will never tell my relative not to accept the throne of Spain. This is unacceptable." Well, Napoleon III, his popularity was waning, and he was trying to find a way of uniting the French, so he figured, hey, a war against the Germans, that will really unite the French, because, the French don't like the Germans don't like the French, so we'll get a war going on here, and it'll be an easy war, I'll win, and I'll look like the great warlord, and everybody will praise me, and this will make my power and popularity greater in France. So Napoleon III kept pushing the issue, and William I kept pushing the issue. Now Bismarck said, hey, all the Germans hate the French, so maybe if I can get all the Germans on board to go to war against France, this would be a way of uniting the Germans. So both Napoleon III and both Bismarck were saying, hey, we can use this war to unite our respective countries against the enemy. So what happened is that when you have two people who want to go to war with each other, usually they go to war. Now what happened is that in 1871, Prussia and Austria went to war. It's called the Franco-Prussian War. And this war didn't go too well for Napoleon III. The Prussian army invaded France. They won a big victory at the Battle of Sedan, which is in the borderlands between France and Germany. The French army was completely defeated, and better than that, Napoleon III was actually captured. He became a prisoner of war, and he had to abdicate the throne. And so the German army marched on Paris, and what happened is that in France, they declared themselves to be a new republic, the Third Republic. After Napoleon III abdicated the throne, they called for elections to a new constitution for France. Well, while they were drafting this constitution, they asked for an armistice. So what happened was that as a result of this war, the southern German states, they decided to join with the northern German states. And as German armies were surrounding Paris, they met at Versailles. The German states got together at Versailles, just outside of Paris, as their armies were occupying France. And it was in the Hall of Mirrors that all the German states agreed to recognize William I as the Emperor of Germany. So and what they did is basically they extended that 1867 Constitution to all the other German southern states. So in 1871, Germany was united by this. All the delegates from all the German states met at Versailles. How humiliating for France that Germany would unite in France while occupying France. And then in 1871, under the terms of the treaty that ended the war, the France was deprived of Alsace-Lorraine. Lorraine and Alsace had been annexed by France in 1648. Lorraine had been annexed to France in 1748. For the German nationalists, these territories were not French, they were German. And as part of the treaty that ended the war, Alsace-Lorraine were taken from France and made part of the new united German Empire. Under the Prussian King William I now became the first emperor of the new Second Reich, the Second Empire. So Bismarck had achieved his goal thanks to war and diplomacy. So that's how Germany came united. All right, well, we ran out of time today, but we're going to finish up. We're going to talk about other developments in Europe and the unification of Italy. We're going to do that on Thursday.